So, fortunately, I didn't miss the one. I missed the WhatsApp talk, basically. I saw a good portion of the Jordan Hubbard's talk, who basically talked about the direction of FreeBSD, and that basically that what end users want is actually on bits and pieces. They don't actually want a one solution, because there isn't anything that actually, any one solution that works for lots of people. And one of the things he pointed out was the need for unified configuration model with LaunchD. Do you remember what else he discussed? I mean,
LaunchD, NotifyD, unified config file format.
right. So did he discuss anything beyond that? Or did I think it sort of features?
Just describing everything as the Lego building.
Yeah, Lego building blocks,
Yeah.
so that people want building blocks.
Pick a platform and stick with it.
Pardon me?
Pick a platform and stick with it.
Or pick a sort of target platform.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Join the club.
Then, in terms of David Maxwell,
Once a month.
talked about a variant of a tool that he called PipeCut, which was basically kind of a merged set of pipes in an editor. I mean, basically, how would you describe PipeCut?
It's basically, you've got a pipeline and it lets you view each step of the pipeline interactively, plop stuff into the pipeline or remove stuff out of the pipeline dynamically, and with really fast shortcuts for very common pipe steps like, piping through grep for something or grep-v something out, and, and stuff like that. Yeah.
And then we had Alex Rosenberg of Sony Entertainment. The PlayStation 4 runs FreeBSD, which you probably all know. And basically just talked about developing a little bit on FreeBSD. There wasn't a whole lot of technical content because it's Sony and whatnot. But I thought it was interesting that this is the first time they haven't written a custom kernel for the PlayStation.
Oh no, the PlayStation 3 was previously as well.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
It was BSD, wasn't it? No?
So I went and talked to that guy and asked him
Oh.
because I heard the rumor that it was a custom kernel with little pieces
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
of FreeBSD.
Yeah.
Which
Okay.
is, which is way different than what they're doing on the PS.
Yeah, I mean, basically now it's just a generic kernel, whereas there they had their own hypervisor and they had their.
But actually the game developers all build on Windows.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that was an interesting. That was actually a big part of the discussion. Was basically the tool chain
Yeah.
making LLVM work well on Windows. So basically, you're implicitly facilitating Windows developers developing for FreeBSD, which kind of.
Well, interestingly enough, Microsoft is opening up the Visual Studio thing and
.NET.
going to run it on other platforms. So,
Opening.NET.
it's
Not
gonna be,
not the CLR, the actual framework.
.NET, yeah.
Everything.
Interesting.
well, we're both.
Well, the CLR's been open forever.
Well, not like this. I mean,
Okay.
they're not going to. It hasn't been supported running on other platforms and targeting things other than Windows.
It's
Okay.
going to go to MIT licensing.
So there's shared
I
source.
heard that Alan Jude is tackling the configuration project.
Furthermore,
He wants to get started on it, so he can decide what the format will
the
be.
main version of
It will
it
not be
is
XML.
free download.
Well, yeah, he has his.
Just not
He,
using
I think it was the second day. Did he talk about it? Oh, yeah, so
He
he talked
talked
about it.
about-
Lightning talk on
yeah.
day 2. Is he UCL? It's a unified configuration library, and I think he's big on JSON.
Okay.
Most of us don't really care. We just want something that works. And we're not religious. Is basically, and so the idea, if you were to say port LaunchD with LaunchD services, is LaunchD doesn't actually know anything about config files unless you shove an XML parser into it. Like someone did. So you basically, you communicate with it over a well-defined IPC interface, and you have something that parses whatever configuration file. So ideally, if it's JSON or XML or whatever, it all basically channels into your service manager format. So, but yeah, that's a good thing, and that kind of ties into what Jordan said about needing a service manager, moving away from the RC scripts. Then we did breakouts. There wasn't really that much substantial. I mean, that there was, talked a little bit about, well, okay, the FreeBSD Foundation has some commitment, I guess, from industry for supporting ARM64 and making it tier 1. As far as some people are concerned, tier 1 just means having package support, but I pointed out that if you use tier 1 to mean that, then people are just going to come up with some other term because that's not adequate.
There was apparently we're going to get actual developer hardware for ARM64.
We're cabbing. It's cabbing, but it looks very it still looks very embedded-ish.
It's not, it doesn't look like it sort of looks like a server platform.
It's not there yet, but
it's
there,
not,
yeah, AMD actually has a developer box. It's not price competitive, interesting from a price competitive standpoint, but if you're really fascinated by ARM64 for some reason, you can get 4 cores with 16 gigabytes.
Right. The important part, at least for me, was the fact that ARM has gone through and they are using UEFI. They have gotten the right bits into ACPI such that going forward.
They appear to have made a substantial commitment to having FreeBSD actually work.
Right, and so they've made a commitment to having FreeBSD work, and I think because, you know, again, going through UEFI, going through ACPI, having it look like a server as opposed to look like an embedded system. It seems
Well,
like
they
they've
have it
got
sort
that.
of in the sense that it's embedded systems. Every processor might have variants of instructions, which
Right.
mean different EMMUs. Basically, you want to have install it on a chip from a new vendor and have it just boot up and work, which you
Right.
don't have now.
Right, right.
And they claim that they'll actually do that with ARM64. Yeah.
We'll see.
AMD is saying that not on their initial ARM64 Seattle, but on the next one after that. What's it called, Chris?
I can't remember what they called, but they're going to be socket compatible with x86 chips.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, they're saying that not on the current AMD ARM64, but on the next generation AMD ARM64, you'll be able to buy a motherboard that you can throw an AMD 64 Opteron in, and it works as a server, and you can pull out that chip and plop in an AMD ARM64 chip, and it works as a server.
And running ARM code, right?
Yeah.
And they're already trying to blur the line because they call their ARM64-bit ARM processor an Opteron A1100.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like the Opteron A1100, yeah.
I mean, that was done before. Didn't they do that with, what was it? Alpha CPU?
No, you're thinking. I think you're thinking PowerPC Prep.
I'm thinking about something with AMD CPUs and Hyper Transport and some other thing. I forget.
I can't think of anything that was like that.
Okay.
But you could be right, but my memory.
It never
does
shifted
not-
anything
does not
yet.
tell.
Right. What I'm thinking of is PowerPC Chirp or Prep, depending on how you did it. And the idea was it was a reference platform.
Chirp was
That's-
supposed to be this.
Right. It was supposed to be this thing. Yeah.
Kip, on that topic, do you recall if the foundation was actually going to be handing out any money for development on ARM V8? Was there-
Yes,
do you remember-
yes, they were. I mean, that's what their commitment translates. Commitment translates to dollars.
So Andy Thompson, Ed just did say to me yesterday that Andy's doing the ARM64 stuff now, like under sponsorship from the foundation. So they're actually
Yeah, no,
putting
the
some
financial,
money into it,
according to Ed, the foundation has made a commitment to, full.
And that kind of goes back to the tier 1 thing.
Right.
So like, it's fine and good to port. That's cool. That's an interesting project.
No,
I mean,
George.
Was there going to be like an ongoing effort by the foundation to
Yes,
actively
Ed
update
actually explicitly said that. He explicitly said, we're not going to say that on this day, this date, the ARM64 will be tier 1, but there will be a continuing ongoing effort to make it functionally on par with x86.
Interesting.
That was his statement. I mean, the degree to which they can deliver it obviously depends on their finances and their ability to do project management.
So my intention for packages for ARMv8 initially are going to be QEMU enabled. I got a commitment from Stacy. He's got the back end support for QEMU to build ARMv8 packages. So when I can do a build world, that'll be a week of me swearing and grinding ARMv8 packages out.
Don't be off.
Yeah.
Then Kirk gave a talk. I mean, he has this spiel that he does repeatedly called The Narrative History of BSD, which is actually which is quite amusing, which is just which I won't go into. He has a video which you can order if you're so interested, discussing the evolution of BSD from Bill Joy's involvement to the later years with AT&T, et cetera, et cetera. And how he got into writing a file system and got stuck kind of being responsible for
As his intern, as a summer project.
as a summer project, he wrote UFS, and then Bill Joy said, well, what about this and this? And he was like, but I've got PhD thesis.
No,
Bill Joy just said,
Right. Yeah, the other thing is that Joy went to Kirk for advice about starting Sun, and Kirk, who had an MBA, said, no, I don't know if this is such a good idea right now.
and then Joy was 4 or 5 at Sun, and so, and Kirk lives modestly to this day. And he says, yeah, so if anything, don't get a BMP. You get an MBA and never ask him for business advice.
That was pretty good.
That was he was hyped it on those things. Then Brendan Gregg did it just.
Never get in the way of the person who's doing it.
Sorry,
Please.
So the next day is the first talk. Brendan Gregg did his performance analysis talk. The slides are online. I can't quickly summarize it, but he basically revisited flame graphs and how they usefully break down and visualize profiles, and it's a way of collectively visualizing things. It was heavily visiting, sort of discussing flame graphs. Anyone who's actually
Lots
there?
of neat stuff about how to do performance analysis on FreeBSD.
Right.
And if you're starting out in there, go read his stuff because it'll help you a whole bunch.
Yes. I'm not sure if that. So he gave 2 talks, one at Meet BSD and one at the Dev Summit. I'm not sure which one was flame graph specifically and which one was the general.
The one at the Dev Summit was flame graph specifically, but the performance analysis went.
Yeah, that was really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the slides appear to be online, so I would actually reference those because I can't really.
And they have code references.
Yeah.
We learned that Facebook doesn't like red flame graphs; they like blue icicle graphs.
Yes.
This is a factual. That is a factual statement. I learned that you can copy and paste with UU encoded data to ensure that your tabs are tabs and your spaces are spaces.
That was pretty slick.
I didn't.
Yeah, he actually UU encodes.
I caught it all.
He actually UU encodes his source code to make sure that tabs aren't.
He couldn't, for whatever reason, he couldn't SCP between the 2 machines. So in one machine, he UU encoded it, copied it onto the clipboard on his Mac, and then on the other, and then he used PB paste on the Mac, typed it through UU decode.
It's the old days of Kermit.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then there's a break, and then someone insets a break, and your machine pauses, and then debugger.
But anyway.
Yeah, I haven't used UU decode in 15 years.
I know,
So,
yeah.
Sadly, I've used it a couple of years ago.
It's fine.
there's nothing wrong with it. It just seems gratuitous. But
Well,
yes.
actually, I think it's base 64, but still.
So, and then Corey Vixie, who actually is
Yeah, Pixie's.
Vixie's son,
Both sons.
a love child, is did a talk on web apps on embedded BSD, and his basic point was that the sort of ecosystem surrounding web development has gotten much more sophisticated. The tools are better. It's much easier to do. Don't be afraid of JavaScript. And of course, everyone just cringed and made fun of it. But I asked if people actually recognized, 9 different buzzwords, and I think the only thing that most people actually recognize was Node.js. But can other people give a better takeaway from that?
But he was trying to make, I've heard the talk before, I didn't go to this one, but he's trying to make it easy to write FreeNAS apps.
Yeah.
Right, and using the sandboxy stuff that web people do, where they develop an app in an almost a sandbox, and he just had this thing where he copied it up to the FreeNAS box, and then shit just magically worked, which was kind of impressive to watch.
And that's not an easy thing to accomplish in FreeBSD, to be perfectly honest. To get all the frameworks and get the system set up to where the web devs can actually do.
Well, that's another
operate
general
like that
thing where FreeBSD is kind of missing the boat. Is there's a
It's-
lot of
Sure.
sandboxy type things that basically for moving sort of self-containing entire environments
And in this universe, I mean, developers are just going to sit down, they're going to punch the button on EC2, and they're going to get their dev environment from an AMI, and they're just going to move on. And we have like a class of images on EC2 that are kind of generic OS. They're not, this is your Rails VM.
Yeah, and the trouble is, I think a lot of people who would be motivated to support that don't actually do any of the development.
Well, the irony about all of that is we still haven't finished that, and then Docker came along and then shook us really hard. This is the Linux container stuff.
Well, how did it shake us? I'm not
Because
actually.
now the way that Docker works is that containers are like jails laid upon other jails, and so what they'll do is someone will grab an instance of a VM, which is effectively like, say it's a container with Ubuntu and Python, and then someone will add a framework and release it as this Docker pre-made thing, and someone will take that, add their own code on top of it, and then that becomes another Docker thing. So I've set up a couple of things where you look at it and there's like 15 layered containers, all with read-only containers underneath them, right?
Containers all the way down.
It's all contained. It's like read-only loopback. Loopback type mount all the way down.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good talk for another day.
Yes.
Basically, fitting better into that. Then Robert Ryan at the heart of the digital economy, deep storage innovations for the New World Data Center. The slides are online, and that was actually kind of, I don't know. That's. Can someone give an interesting high bit on that? Because it's.
That was the Western Digital presentation.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of marketing stuff. They could have dove down a lot more technical, I think, for the crowd. But
Yeah.
It wasn't very technical. It was very high level.
Right, I think, the feeling I had was, number one, he wasn't sure how technical the crowd would be, so he kept it at a high level.
Yeah.
And number two, it sounded like, I had the feeling like it was kind of something that was kind of thrown in at the last minute.
They were the
I-
facility sponsor.
Huh?
They were the facility sponsor.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
They should have had a presentation.
Exactly. I mean, when I saw that they were hosting, I thought, ooh, maybe they're doing something with WD, maybe doing something with FreeBSD, which would be really nice because I would like some tools. And so I asked them after the fact, so why did you guys sponsor it and everything? It's like, I don't really know. I think just somebody knew that we had open space and they talked about it, out of band and said, yeah, sure, we can host it. And then, okay, they're hosting it, so yeah, they should give it up.
But it didn't really cost them anything, did it? No, it was a cost.
For someone who isn't following storage, it was an interesting talk.
Yeah.
Right? But if someone, I'm sure the people who've been following storage even remotely closely, this wasn't news to them, but it was nice to be reminded of what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a couple of things even I didn't know about. I didn't know that the stuff we were talking before about shingling and there being a couple of additional command set type of stuff happening to for the host aware stuff. I didn't realize that those were actually being standardized. Thank God.
So there's actually 3 levels. That's one of the few things I actually do remember is that there's the basically host oblivious, which the drive takes everything. Then in the future, when you have server drives, you'll actually have them be host aware where there's add extensions to the command set, but they don't have to. And then there's actually a completely different interface where it looks like a new device. I mean, it's not.
Well, no. So I specifically asked about that, and he said that even with that, the idea is that it's not like, it's still going to be, a SATA or a SAS drive, but it's going to use a different, like for SATA, there's a bunch of commands which are defined, and there's a bunch of commands which are currently marked reserved. So they're going to take some of those, they're going to create new commands, and they might make it so, okay, for these drives, standard read and write and stuff won't work, but these other commands will work, and then things like identify device and smart and whatever, all those commands won't change at all. So,
Okay, that was clear.
yeah, well, it wasn't entirely clear, but the operative thing that I got was that it is being standardized both for the SCSI and the ATA side.
And Jay, you just made the point that, like I said before, that it will be available on servers whenever they hit 10 terabytes. So that's still in development right now. Then Alfred gave something that was meant to be kind of trolling, but it was a good point of discussion, is how do we get younger people engaged in FreeBSD. I mean, basically no one in the room was, barely any in the room was under 28, so sort of how do you get fresh blood into the community. And I don't think we came up with any sort of concrete suggestions. So,
Gaming?
pardon me?
Gaming.
No, how's that going?
Well, that was actually a proposal, was running, Minecraft servers on FreeBSD, having a prefab, and then someone else said, well, Minecraft, so 2 years ago, it's something else now.
They're already off doing League of Legends
Yeah.
and stuff.
I don't know.
I've encountered people in the
We
FBSD
have a comment.
going like, is this platform good for games? And I'm all, where did you ever get that idea?
Where do you?
But somehow people are getting these ideas in their heads that these systems can be used for things
Well,
that they want to do.
So
Well,
there's a group of people.
I ran StarCraft 2 on Linux underline, but
There's a group of people, and I don't know them, but they're porting FreeBSD, they're porting the Unreal Engine to compile and run on FreeBSD, which is, it's a non-trivial task because the code has a lot of, like, if Windows, else if Linux, else if Mac OS, and so there's a lot of stuff that, like, it's mostly surrounding,
Well,
like,
those are pretty helpful, actually, when you
yeah,
say they come.
yeah. But there's the Excel guys are actually, I had a chat with them a few days ago, and they're trying to push in all of the updated DRI support and updated Mesa support that then will enable people to use FreeBSD to do gaming stuff, because right now our DRI code is so out of date, none of the existing gaming stuff will run, or none of the development environments will work, but it's getting better, so.
But yeah, that gets back to the original question, how do we get people who don't have gray hair involved in the project?
We have the
which, I mean, I don't have the answer of getting them excited about it, but I do. I do have ideas. I did have something I want to discuss in terms of making it more accessible. I mean, in terms of contributions and changing the distinguishing contributors from the governance model.
Yes.
So, and then there was Alan Jude's talk on the UCL config, which is the Unified Configuration Library, which was quite good from the standard point of just, and the slides are online for that, just having one channel that everything talks to.
Commit it. Commit it. Just commit it.
Right.
Yeah, that was a good talk.
Yeah.
It was.
So, I don't know, do you think this is a good time to segue on to the LaunchD discussion?
I think so.
Okay, because the UCL ties into it. So LaunchD is just an isolated daemon. Doesn't do any parsing, delegates that to agents, which in turn parse all the agent files. And you can specify on OS X, options for under what conditions a daemon should be launched, whether it should be restarted if it crashed, if it started on demand. It's all quite well thought out. And so the configuration language is actually quite separate. And so there have been a number of attempts to port LaunchD. It was done in 2005, done more recently. Someone took an older port and ported it, but integrated XML parser directly into LaunchD, which basically means you're sticking XML parsing logic into a NIT. I don't know who here thinks that's a good idea.
If I'm a black hat, yes.
Oh, good idea. If
Well,
you're black hat,
I mean, basically, it'll be awesome fuzzing your init. That'll be kind of fun. So anyhow, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but Benno dug up the compat mock bits from NetBSD, which were moved to Attic a while ago because there's only sort of half-hearted support for PowerPC binaries. But I think the general notion is if you instead support the OS X APIs, then it becomes, if not trivial, much easier to run LaunchD. And so I ported that this weekend, and I added a minimal subset of libsystem support. So mock IPC works on FreeBSD. I have someone else at IX who's ex-Apple, who is basically trying to get the LaunchD to build against the headers. So, pardon me?
I'm shocked and happy that you made Mark IPC work on FreeBSD. I think that's a good like full circle coming back.
It's kind of twisted for anyone who's familiar with the history of lights and whatnot, but
How did you make it work? What did you use as underlying IPC? Mock IPC?
they implement the mock IPC in a really crafty way.
It's all
It's
user land?
what?
It's all user land?
No, there's a kernel API. We implement the mock kernel API, the OS X, basically a subset, not all of the syscom calls, but the messaging and the VM, the mock messaging ports and the core mock messaging VM imports system calls and the services layer are all there.
That's cool. I guess it's fast IPC.
I doubt that. I think if you want fast IPC, you use something else because the writes checking and whatnot. But you have mock IPC. I'm sure with some effort it could be made fast, but there is not.
It's something to work on.
It's something to work on. It's in my tree. For anyone who's interested, it's out there. I can run simple mock programs. It's not LaunchD isn't coming out tomorrow, but it basically makes it easier to track upstream so that, when in the next release, next drop of LaunchD or next update on GitHub, they add some other bits that are tied into mock that you don't, again, have to convert that to something BSD-centric. So it's an approach. I consider it somewhat speculative, but it's interesting. Scott Long then talked about Netflix. The big gist of that was that they're doing bulk encryption in the kernel. Do you remember what else there was?
No. It sounded like they were also talking about running web services in the kernel too, which seemed kind of.
Well, for streaming content. Basically, that's not really a big deal. And
Still
because,
doing,
well, the thing is, they're doing all doing send files.
Yeah.
So basically, send file you have a command come in, you call send file, and all it goes through bulk encryption.
Oh, so the extensions that Gleb's writing basically makes it so that you call send file and it'll asynchronously read pages in from disk that aren't in memory. Because the way send file works is either it all has to be in memory,
Right.
because it just maps the pages out to the socket buffer,
Okay.
or it'll block whenever it goes to fault in the pages.
Right.
And so for web servers, that's terrible because it means that Nginx doesn't do worker threads. And so if it's not in the VM or if there's lots of VM pressure, the process stalls waiting for that one IO to occur.
Right.
And so Scott and Gleb's project at the beginning of the year turned out to be a lot more complicated than anyone thought to begin with, was to make it so they can do a fully asynchronous send file where they...
Okay.
If anyone looks at the send file code, it's about 4 or 5 times longer than it was before. So,
Yeah.
That's
Gleb just went down all of my codes and it's slightly less. Not that I'm bitter or anything. Yeah, so they're already doing the data pipeline in the kernel, but they're not doing web.
Okay.
So they just wanted to add a transform layer to do the encryption part.
Okay.
And then I don't know that anything more details than that. I've vaguely spoken to Randall and to John Mark about the stuff they've been doing, but I don't know anything freaking
Okay. Okay.
And then there was kind of a not particularly exciting talk, but about usability of the FreeBSD site. There's a girl from Alfred's team who is basically redoing the FreeBSD website, and I very much approve of her changes, but I don't have a whole lot to bring to the table.
So she's been presenting these, she's been proposing, so Claudia's been proposing these changes for a while and kind of just yelling into the void with nobody really listening. And so this was the first time that the FreeBSD community actually
Listened.
was like, oh yeah, we kind of suck.
But
And so she made a
no-
good point that it isn't 2002. I mean, if you look at her
Yes.
proposal vis-a-vis what's there now, and you're like,
It looks like the Ubuntu website, except.
well, it does, but the thing is that's desirable for actually making it accessible. I mean, I don't know, I
Well,
think it's a good thing.
So also in response to that, the foundation website was updated and deadlifted with somebody doing Rails or Django or something.
I like the new foundation.
Yeah, and in comparison to the FreeBSD.org website, it looks terrible. We look kind of, where do you even click on, what did she say? It's like,
Yeah,
where do you even click on stuff?
Download, yeah.
Where's the download? Yeah,
Well, I
no,
notice every time I want to browse a mailing list, I have to actually think, oh yeah, it's under some non-intuitive place of browsing the mailing list. I have to basically, this makes no sense, but.
Now, unfortunately, I would see, so I mean, Glenn is on the doc team, Warren is on the doc team. I would see chatter about this, and there's been silence. So I mean, Claudia gave a great presentation, but I'm not seeing any activity on the doc side to actually update the webpage. So if you think the website sucks, you know, start whining about it on mailing lists, and nothing's happened, and nothing is happening.
I mean, who controls, the docs team controls the website?
Yeah,
So she's gonna have to run it through them to get it launched, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
So her vague plan is to continue converting more of the website over, so it's a drop-in replacement, right? She wants to make it as easy as possible, but there's a whole bunch of manual converting that needs to happen. And then I have a feeling that either, it'll happen because the doc people want it to happen, or it'll happen because we give a tarball to Peter Webb and Peter Webb makes it happen. I mean, either way,
Might not be a bad idea.
either way,
to get it kicked.
I'm waiting, when she gets more spare time, she'll finish off converting more of the content, because at the moment, a lot of the pages are just placeholders, they don't actually have the content on it, and then I think the other thing is to get the theme working right for the handbook and other stuff that's dynamically generated already. And so I think her plan there is to import that dynamically, that HTML into the framework whatever framework, Flask, right? And then have a static website that's just ready so people can go to it and see an A/B comparison. So at the moment it's more of like a proposal rather than a complete site conversion. I think she wants to do the complete site conversion first.
so the way the project works is that she would have to kind of be accepted. This is kind of hopefully
Yeah, I'll go to that in a moment. I think it'll.
She kind of would have to be accepted by DocEng into the cool kids corner, right?
Right, let me just, so I'm almost done with this. So I gave a latent talk on, for Isilon, they're going to be potentially using 40 gig E on their back end. And so I'll be developing a new network driver interface that basically moves a lot of the device or all of the device independent cruft out of the drivers and into a comment layer that will hopefully do a much better job of it than most of the drivers do now. And it can also make it easier to do sort of general things like congestion management between TCP and buffering so that TCP stops trying to send huge windows and then just abruptly drops. And basically, instead of having the other end drop it, if you have too many TCP connections going on, you actually have a lossy network within your kernel between your hardware and the TCP stack. So that's something that Lawrence is actually working on, and this may help him out a little bit. But I don't think that's particularly exciting for this crowd, so I won't talk about that any further. So I think is generally interesting is the issue of getting contributors involved with FreeBSD who aren't committers. How many people have submitted patches to FreeBSD? And how many of you actually had them committed properly?
A couple of them, yes. One of them, no.
Does ports count?
Yes,
Sure.
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, ports is generally better about that sort of thing.
You would think.
But they're not.
It's really hit and miss.
Correct.
Really hit and miss. Depends on whose attention you get and on what day and the phase
Okay,
of
so
the-
it's a similar sort of problem.
Oh,
So,
yes.
so, in FreeBSD we have this model where basically they try to cultivate you and they bring you in and you have commit rights to SRC or ports or doc, and then basically you have the keys to the kingdom, and then it's just a question of getting along with people so that stuff you commit doesn't get backed out.
As I
And,
discovered.
pardon me?
As I discovered.
And so, I think this is, and then I brought up a discussion of, well, how do we get people's patches in? And the suggestion is, well, you attach them to a bug. And it's like, well, no, we did that, and it didn't get committed. It's like, well, how to then submit it to a mailing list? We did this, and it didn't happen. And a lot of people have trivial patches that never make it in. And I'm not a huge Linux fan, but I know that the few patches that I submitted long ago, made it into the next dot release immediately. And so I always objected to the sort of elitist Linux model of having one person that got to decide whether or not your stuff got to go in, because we're more egalitarian, and then you can check stuff in. But as a practical matter, unless you have a consensus on something, it often doesn't go in anyway, because you basically wait months and months for code reviews, and by that time it doesn't compile anymore. So even if you do have a commit bit. So I think we should think about the fact that maybe Linux got something righter than us, and it maybe isn't just the GPL and dumb luck that, made them so much more widely adopted. And consider the fact that their ability to take contributions from a wider audience. And there's also the issue that they're paid to do that, but there's also a general usage model here is that people are brought in to be committers to check their own crap in, not to help other people get their stuff into the tree. And there's just generally no notion that that's your responsibility. There's a certain notion of, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, you scratch mine in terms of code reviews, that I review your code because I'm going to need you to review my code so that I can check it in and not, get into a huge argument about everything. And not have to wait months for you to review it. But in terms of actually being an enabler of new work coming in, there's no social notion in FreeBSD of that in general. It's basically, if someone does something interesting, we'll try to make him a committer, even if he's not really that interested in that. He just wants to upstream it. Basically, he upstreams it, and then what happens? Well, the last time the Corps had a referendum to change the election model, it failed, and not because it got voted down, but because they didn't get the necessary quorum. Because what you've done is you've created such a large committer base so that you can get all these people involved, but most of them people really don't give a crap about the community. They give a crap about you pushing little bits into the tree, which is fine, but basically what you've done is you've simultaneously made the bar too low and you've made the bar too high. The bar is too low for effectively dictating the direction of FreeBSD, because simply by not doing anything, you blocked changes to core bylaws. But its bar is too high because you have to cultivate this person, in order to get his patches in. And a lot of people just have trivial patches. Quirks will actually make it in pretty quickly, but a lot of very small patches that should make it in don't. So what we can do and should do is basically say, well, what kind of behavior do we want to encourage by rewarding people with commit bits? Because we need to sort of change things, because while FreeBSD still works very well, it's not nearly as relevant or nearly as successful as many of us would like to think it could be. And I think by basically making it, it may be too late to actually matter anymore at this point, so maybe it's academic, but I think going forward, basically it shouldn't just be contributions on the code side, it should also basically people who don't do any code contributions, but who are very active, constructive reviewers should be considered valued, because they can help facilitate getting outside code in. So basically, someone might be a committer who himself writes no code, but does incredible amounts of constructive reviewing, is more valuable than someone who just writes his own, shoves his own bits in periodically for an employer. So, and there's also for perception from the community is that, with this in-group and out-group, I mean, yes, you can, establish a rapport with a committer. The committer will sponsor you, if you're working on the right things that are interesting to him, but it's very hit or miss. And it is an established model for doing that, but I think it needs to be, and I think a good case can be made that it should be broadened and that we should try to encourage behavior. And so one thing that I proposed is that unless he can come up with a more politically acceptable candidate, come January, well, as an experiment for 3 months, I'll try to be the equivalent of a Linux lieutenant for networking and basically try to shovel those bits upstream that aren't disruptive and in one way or another, and don't break things or don't make pervasive changes. And if you want to check a note via Vinci, I can't help you. But for a lot of changes can be integrated, reviewed quickly, and basically in a turnaround, get feedback promptly that no, we're never going to consider this, or yes, you need to make these changes. And having prompter feedback can basically would make us much more accessible to people who aren't involved, and basically make it more interesting to a wider group of people. So who are potential committers and too. And I think basically there are people who might actually have ended up being committers, but because it's too onerous getting your bits in initially, they move on to other more productive venues that have penguins.
Amen.
So I just wanted to sort of get people's thoughts on this, and I know that people generally throw up their hands and say, well, yeah, I know it's a hard problem. It's like, well, it's been the same problem for 15 years, so you keep doing the same thing and you get the same outcome.
Can I ask, I've heard this over and over again about the problem with getting stuff committed, and I haven't done it, really. So I'm curious, is this because people in the project are just antisocial, or is it real
Well, no, because you're responsible.
objections,
You're basically it's in an asymmetric risk-reward situation. You're not rewarded for checking on something that might break something, but you are responsible if it breaks something and you have to fix it later.
Okay.
So there's a downside for them, and there's no upside. And there's basically no notion of the community as a whole, the dynamics of basically siloing yourself that as a group we tend to do.
The other thing I've noticed is a lot of the people who were subsystem maintainers have moved on to other things. So when I was doing some of the RSS hacking, Peter Agrian was the main reviewer, even though Robert was the one who did the initial RSS work, because he was just too busy. He looked at some of the stuff and had some feedback, but he and Lawrence are both extremely busy at the moment, and at the moment there's no active group of people doing networking-y stuff, right? So a lot of the subsystem people that people turn to, they tend to be they just come across as very busy. And they don't come across as not wanting to be helpful, because they'll be helpful, but a lot of people are overworked,
But then any of these people who aren't overworked, who aren't necessarily as qualified, but basically there's a subset of the bits that, there's sort of not there's a lot of stuff that could still make those.
So the other interesting difference I've noticed when doing Linux development, kernel development versus BSD kernel development is like the community expectations for doing Linux development are, no, you can't send me a 5,000 line diff, right? Like if you want to get your entire work in, it's on to you to as a contributor to start breaking the work up into pieces that we can test and build on top of other things.
But there's prompt feedback to that effect. And there is not
mostly because the individual pieces can be seem to be more digestible to a lot of people, right? But as a counterexample, we just had someone from F5 dump in the 1 gig superpage was it userland support? Yeah, userland 1 gig superpage mapping support as a Git patch set, which is like there are 50 patches in that patch set, right? And I think there are 2 people that right now their fingers in the VM and like they're Kip and Alan, and both of them are extremely busy again, right? So there are people that are actually trying to contribute code in to these subsystems that are very complicated, and we just lack.
Well, but that comes back to being a chicken and egg thing. It's basically, if you start accepting these contributions, I mean, basically, you getting people engaged and basically getting an active discussion of reviews. And so basically, we've always said, well, we're responsible, we're the insiders, and we discuss that, and then we're overloaded, go away. So it's kind of an on-off model, as opposed to having an active discussion.
The interesting thing with dealing with the Linux Wi-Fi group is that it's hierarchical, and if you submit a patch, outside of some very specific situations, the Wi-Fi maintainer in general, John Linville, if you send him a patch and no one objects, he'll just merge it. Because his opinion is like, look, it goes into the wireless next tree, and if it breaks, then you'll have to fix it or I'll back it out.
Right.
But the default is to just say, screw it, I'm gonna accept.
Right, there's a
stuff
certain
that looks
acceptance that
fine.
your subsystem may break, there's a general acceptance that your subsystem may break in the interim term in this lieutenant's tree. And then basically this will come out in the wash.
Yes, and that's what happens. It's like the Linux wireless code cops a lot of crap because it.
And I think we need to somehow have a model where we're accepting stuff that's potentially crap. I mean, the bar has to be lower in some respects, so we have to accept stuff that's potentially shit, and under the understanding that it'll come out in the wash. And that's the problem with having just head, or people have their isolated branches.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
and that's something where the sort of hierarchical
Well, it's
works
interesting
better.
because the whole point is, it's like if the tree is unstable, it's Linville's problem, and so he will quite happily back stuff out if people say, this patch broke the tree and the original submitter can't fix it, then Linville just goes,
No.
right?
And that's actually something that we've sort of, because we're an in-group, we're sensitive to each other's feelings, and so this is kind of this is an outdated example, but it's just because it's so extreme. Basically, Scott was trying to label a 5.0 release, and Baldwin checked in preemption, which he'd only tested on his single processor laptop, and it didn't work out very well.
There was drama.
Pardon me?
There was drama.
There was drama. And basically, Julian had to jump in, and it delayed the release by another 4 months. It caused a lot of drama. And that should have just been backed out in his mind, and I think that's a general notion that basically bad crap will get checked in, and we need to not be is attached to our code, and it'll get backed out if something goes wrong. And if we have a more active development model, that'll be part of it. So.
I don't, my opinion kind of tends towards yours on this, that there should be more, there should be areas of responsibility that are more clearly defined. And that leads to kind of a discussion of the grumblings right now about breaking up base into something that looks like, I don't want to say packages, because in some corners that turns into a whole different bike shit, but things, like we want to be able to update the contrib chunks, OpenSSL or compilers.
Well, like for example, I'd like to be able to drop in launch D and not have to have the bike shed over RC. And basically, I just want that to be an option one way or the other, and not have to break up base myself and install this port.
And that's not a thing you can do right now.
Right.
And that's not a thing a maintainer can do right now. It's not a thing. So you can't, realistically, the subsystems and even just the directory structure don't lend themselves to actually segregating it into maintainable areas. Because I'm off in one land of maintenance right now, and I'm not necessarily interested in, say, what's going on in CAM. And I shouldn't necessarily have an opinion on that. And the people who want to be involved in that should be able to go and break their version of CAM, like in a Linux Next or a kernel Next kind of thing. And we can't do that right now.
We either break it or we don't break it.
Well, and so to carry on with that point, there's a whole, another example is that there's been this whole chunk of work in the last year to try to tidy up the make system, done by a whole bunch of people, and it's pissed a bunch of other people off because the way that you did things before, the shortcuts you could take when making things like kernel modules, are slowly becoming less shortcutty, right? And so people are used to things like the infrastructure not changing very much. And then when people want to churn it, things break in interesting ways. And I guess people are just so used to things working a certain way, they're trying to churn through that.
Well, I think the question is, are they, making things work a different way, just as long as they actually
well,
make
because
it.
the Linux experience is always you're running with scissors. Like the expectation for the last decade is like, you are running forward holding scissors towards you. And everything else about their development model seems to have spun out of that. And in fact, the cute part about this is the Linux Foundation, and Greg over there has in the last year and a half been working on the whole Linux stable release tree for companies that are doing like embedded and long-term releases. So Linux now has the long-term release tree model for snapshot kernel versions that we've been doing forever.
But there's,
right?
There's
But
two
that's in
different
addition
issues.
to the
But that's
well,
in addition to running with scissors, right? But at that point, the people
Well, I
that
think that also goes to show that that the two aren't mutually
well,
exclusive.
the point I was going to make with all of that background is the Linux Foundation is sponsoring all the manpower behind the stable branch, right? And the community is doing the running with scissors thing, which is the completely backward version of what goes on in FreeBSD.
Well, that's also one of the things I was thinking about is that, going forward, if the foundation has money, is that would basically be something useful to do, would be to hire people who, in some respects, are lieutenants, basically maintaining stable portions of the tree, as opposed to adding this feature act. We're always so much in catch-up mode that we don't even think about that. So
the other interesting fallout from the running with scissors model is that up until about 5 or 6 years ago, companies deploying Linux products would pick a snapshot version and then they'd stick with it forever.
Well, they still do.
And right, the developers give zero fucks about that, right? And so these companies invest ridiculous amounts of resources into backporting, right? Which is exactly the problem that the FreeBSD companies do when they don't move forward. And so both FreeBSD and Linux foundations have been encouraging companies to do development on ahead and push things forward. So now when you get an Android phone, it's not running Linux 2.6.23, right? They actually are encouraging the phone manufacturers and the distribution developers to actually ship updated kernels every time to drag the companies forward. So they're being encouraged via this model to dedicate the resources required to keep head going, which is the exact opposite of what, outside of a few instances, goes on in FreeBSD. And why, as much as I might have problems with some developers, I'm happy that some of the companies are running their products on head. Because we need more. I think we need to encourage developers to do more of that.
In some respects, though, isn't that kind of supporting what I'm saying, or where is that?
Well, because a lot of the expectations with FreeBSD is that it's stable and they can pick a branch and we support it forever. And I think that leads into a lot of the expectations from the community and developers.
It leads to stagnation and basically building.
What does this have to do with encouraging contributions? I mean, companies that pick a stable release have a business model that they need. They're like, okay, this is going to exist for 5 years. I can make a product of it, and I'll let the next guy worry about the developmental decisions.
Right.
We were talking.
We're talking about the fallout from running with scissors.
Yeah,
Encouraging contributions basically accepts a certain running with scissors, and there's a certain fallout from running with scissors.
Yeah. Like there are users that are still deploying, like developers that run 9 at home. And 8 at home, right? And if you want to encourage new people to come along and have more of a move things forward, having people run old stable branches at home because they're scared of upgrading is, I think, both a symptom and a cause of this long-term problem.
The case could be made that the Linux folks are accustomed to running with scissors because Git enables them to do that.
They were running with scissors long before.
No, long before Git. They've always done that. That's one of the things that sort of made. I've always been very critical of that. I always thought FreeBSD was superior because it didn't do that. But I'm kind of seeing the it's leading to a lot of stagnation and sort of aging developer base.
We can do both because, I mean, it's a good thing Len's not here because he would kill me.
Oh, you want me to chat with him? I got him on IRC. I can tell him what you say, it's no problem.
And now Sean is the troll. Excellent.
Yes.
Keep going.
But, you know, there is a GitHub mirror of the.
Yeah, but the thing is, but there's the question of, okay, so,
No, right, but what I'm trying to say is, we have a GitHub mirror. It's not officially sanctioned or anything, but if we had, say, somebody from the foundation, say, if Ed was tasked once a week
If we
to,
cloned Ed, and
Yeah.
we tasked Ed's clone to do reviews.
well, to sync up to.
No, it's kept in sync. It works fine.
Right,
but
no, he's talking about contributions, basically. Ed would have his own branch,
Right.
he'd accept a whole bunch of crap and then upstream it.
Any developer can do that. Like right now, any
Yeah, but the thing is, that's the whole
So-
point, is the tools are in place, but the
Right.
culture's not.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is, we don't have the culture, like, nobody wants to say, or even express to anyone else, you know, hey, look, we're on GitHub, and.
Well, it's a very non-confrontational culture, because if you look at Core's decisions, when they're favorable, the vote is announced. When they're not favorable, it's not. And if you try to ask who voted how and why, you know, you're not privy to that information. I used to think it's elitist, but actually after having actually discussed it with, and I was actually surprised to hear who's in Core, because they're all like nice guys, but they haven't been behaving nicely. And it's basically the sort of more socially capable people are, and FreeBSD, the older developers, also very non-confrontational. And they're essentially, for lack of a real, I mean, there's probably a better word for this, so don't get too upset, but they're spineless. And they don't announce votes and rationale and notes from discussions that, you know, affect individuals, because that would involve confrontation and accountability, which they can't cope with. And it basically, and that's sort of something that, you know, people who aren't necessarily so wedded to that notion have to say, you know, I love you guys and all, but, you know, I don't think this is taking us into the future. And so people like Sean Bruno and I, who are, you know, are a little more thick-skinned, can kind of say, you know, we need to do things, let's try and do things differently, see if that helps us move forward.
Right, but has anybody actually ever said, can you put this on GitHub and send a pull request or something?
There's no mechanism for doing that. I mean, that's actually something Ed was discussing about with the tools, is that, you know, people have actually made pull requests and there's no way of getting that upstream. So that's actually part of the workflow that is broken, is there's no notion of pull requests. But people, that's actually probably a good idea.
I mean, there's nothing stopping someone who has commit from going to GitHub and looking and performing the pull that's been requested. But there's nothing necessarily encouraging anyone.
There's no workflow, there's no established cultural workflow for doing that.
That's my question. Has any committer actually actually request that somebody say, clone the repository of GitHub and
check your crap in and ask me to pull it.
Yes. Has anybody done that? Because to me it seemed like
no one's done that. And that's kind of a step forward. That's kind of a subset of what I'm saying. Is that basically that's actually a very good specific proposal. Is that individuals can basically take things and basically do it in a kind of a lazy, asynchronous fashion.
It's a step forward.
No, it would be a step forward. So basically, if you sort of put, because George is pushing reviews, but that doesn't magically get people's crap in. So, and it doesn't help necessarily, people don't necessarily, I don't know if people will be able, non-committers will be able to put their code up for review.
I mean, if people think that supporting the workflow of having people send pull requests to GitHub and having committers go through and manually commit those patches to Subversion. I mean, it breaks the Git workflow a little bit because suddenly branch history gets a little bit lost. But if people think that's the thing to do, then like, let's just start doing it.
I think we should encourage that.
And then you find how crappy the tools are for doing that particular bit, and then troll Alfred until he writes the code to do it.
Correct.
Because Alfred seems to want to make the Git SVN stuff
I like
less
this
terrible.
I
Like, at the end of the day, the problem is not that we don't have people that can't do it. It's that a lot of times people talk about this stuff and then no one wants to sit down and actually.
Well, the thing is, people have so much of their spare time to pontificate or play Xbox or watch TV. I mean, they sit there.
Careful, I do all of those things and I still break the wireless stack.
Well, you're overcommitted to the nth
Oh, absolutely.
degree.
I think everyone agrees. Yes. Yes, everyone agrees. But here's the thing: is if this is the case, and we just like go out, put out a request and say, can we get 10 source committers and 10 doc committers and 10 ports committers to say,
What's your
hey,
plan? So
That was, I didn't actually, I hadn't actually refined it to the degree that Justin was suggesting, but I think that's a good concrete suggestion because I've gotten such apathy of like from committers and core types that I had no mechanism for engaging actual committers. So I was basically going to just try it myself and then use proxies to get crap in. But if committers are actually interested and think that they can recruit other committers, that would be awesome.
So
That
how
would
have
be
you
huge
found
difference.
that? I mean, you've done it so far for like a month and a half. So how have you found that in the last couple of months of doing exactly that? Going through proxies to get code into the tree.
Oh, well, no, I mean, the thing is, a couple of people I know will readily commit, basically they'll try to go for a review and then basically, I've only actually asked, the things that I've been doing are very aggressively stuff that's not going upstream soon. So there's ukern, basically running FreeBSD in userland. There's iflib, which basically creates a new driver API, and I'm not going to try and upstream that until I've actually got all 5 40 gigabit drivers integrated. And then there's mock IPC, which basically adds a whole additional surface area to that for security issues, and that's really not interesting until you have launch deported to it. So none of this is actually going upstream. The only thing I pushed upstream was this fixes to, 4 or 5 different ZFS bugs that date back to when the port was initially checked in. And I wasn't actually entirely thrilled with the patch, but basically it did fix 4 panics, and none of the reviewers had, they all basically said it's better than what's there, so check it in. So Josh just checked it in, and the other thing was, the only other patch was add a patch from I don't remember his name, Oleg wrote to fix buffering, because people were complaining about buffering being lossy. And I saw the discussion about it, and 10 months ago, and I just sort of assumed that since it fixed it for him, he checked it in. But of course he didn't. And so I sent it to Josh, and he said, well, why didn't Oleg check it in? And he asked Oleg and said, well, I just copied it. And so he checked it in. So Josh has been he's actually more comfortable checking my code in than I would be if I had a commit bit. So hasn't been a problem.
So the other thing is that Alfred did a gateway thing for Git where if people sent the FreeBSD Git account a pull request, he'd wrap it up as a NATS patch set, right, and feed it into NATS, which then trolled various parts of the
you can't be trolling mailing lists. You have to have individuals. There have to be. We have a huge problem with the bystander issue. Basically,
yes.
Someone else will deal with it because we know it's an issue. Basically, individuals have to take responsibility for some manageable subset. What I was proposing was I would commit to doing whatever I could within 2 hours on a daily basis. So basically, whatever I could do in 14 hours a week for 3 months, that's what I would do. And anything that, any packets that dropped off behind that would be, and if I had more spare time, I could, help stuff from other subsystems in. But basically, it's sort of like, better to just take a slice out of your developer time and say it's really useful to the community to get these patches in because it basically really kills morale to have things sitting in NATS for years.
So how about we
Or
ask for...
Or on GitHub, having things
Same
sit on
difference.
GitHub.
And it's also be useful taking responsibility for other people's stuff too. One networking developer has a fix for the VM-inch memory leak. And it's been rotting in his P4 branch, and he has fixes for something else rotting in
He said, yeah.
So, basically, I think there's a certain, need to people sort of step up from their individual code and go beyond just reviewing other people's code so they can get their code reviews and sort of take responsibility for that. I think just next year.
So how about we put out a proposal and grab 10 people, 10 of the source committers?
I'm all for it. I mean, if you can actually engage them, I mean, I'd assume that one would need to sort of have a proof of concept, but if people are actually engaged
I think
enthusiastically.
my experience with Linux versus BSD is that people in Linux follow the people in Linux who are known developers who encourage and
Right, it's
inspire,
basically culture changes start with you. So
Right.
basically, even if you don't have, you're not being employed full time, if you can commit to doing this,
So
basically setting aside an hour a day to marshal in some subset of the bullshit and, coordinate with how that works out.
I have anecdotal proof of concept. The back when Lua being introduced into NetBSD was more contentious than it is today. Me, who does not have a commit bit, and this other guy on the mailing list, some user who does not have a commit bit, we just set up a GitHub repository. We didn't clone NetBSD or anything, just a little module that we were working on. It's on GitHub. Literally the next step is someone with a commit bit to just pull it in. That is literally the only thing that is missing in order to get the contributions from two people who are not officially who are contributors but don't have commit bits.
Well, yeah, I mean, you reduce the barrier that much, basically, to somewhat, but.
and not piss off people by being the one who committed the code.
Right. Yeah, so accept a certain amount of break. So accept that, your things will be rocky periodically. It's just, I think the tools are, the paranoia may be greater than justified because, basically you can churn things and they show up, issues show up pretty quickly.
So is everybody in here on like this meetup mailing list? So when Larry or I like update things, you get the spam?
Yes.
So is there a way to like make a mailing list on there that would have?
What, using Meetup to do that?
Yeah, is that a thing?
Let's find out.
It is, but I don't trust it. With
There's BAFUG
I'm just quoting experience from another meetup that I'm a member of.
Okay. What was the problem? So
It's cryptic, and we couldn't get it to work.
Okay. Well, what I was
I'm sorry,
saying.
Just finish your sentence.
Oh, real quick, it was just like, okay, so there's some desire in here, how do you engage other people, so who are the other people that may want to be involved in something like everybody on Friday spends 2 hours trolling through 10 Bugzilla tickets or something.
Well, they've got their bug busters. The problem with, that's a good start, but we've got the bug busters, and I guess that's something, but there's often not enough information. The problem is that's something. I guess that's probably part of it, but yeah, I guess that's a good way to start off. Just having patches attached to Bugzilla. Because you have with ports, you have a bug busters team, but they're overworked and et cetera, et cetera. There's something I can't quite articulate that, an issue with. I guess it really shouldn't, basically unifying that into this workflow. How you have quite found the words or something like that.
Can the foundation provide any leaders?
No, can core, if core can't, I think it's basically you establish a precedent, and then the more technically capable member of core will get involved, and they'll do the same thing, or at least encourage it actively support it, and then you'll get a wider adoption, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just sort of like it's just no. There's basically leadership in this particular context implies breaking away from convention or changing convention somehow. The current tools.
Something has to change.
Isn't that what we're discussing?
And the thing is, that basically the people in the foundation, I mean, they're supporting good development and important features, and the people in core are mostly very capable developers, but they're kind of products of the status quo. And is that unfair? I don't know.
I mean, we had a core election. Other than that,
Yeah, but the thing is, if we can't actually get accountability for why decisions are made a certain way or decisions, then I mean, core basically buckles to public outcry. But in general, it's sort of like core is just basically you vote the least objectionable people on the list.
well, core doesn't, so core in
And core based on community history, the whole commuter model has kind of made core irrelevant because you have too many voters, too many apathetic voters. And because core can't change the bylaws because we have too many kidders who just don't give a shit because they just want to shove their pits in the tree. So basically, you should have people who are sort of the lieutenants who are voting, and then you have people who are committed.
Well, to be fair, in that particular vote, a lot of people didn't vote just because they didn't want to vote.
They didn't
And
vote,
it
yeah.
wasn't because they were apathetic. And a lot of people, don't know what the ratio is. So I wouldn't be so sure that there wouldn't be quorum in any normal election. I think there's quorum in core election, by the way.
Pardon me?
There's always quorum is in core election. I'm not sure what the turnout is, but
Oh, the turnout for the core election?
yeah.
I
It's about
remember
80%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
but how meaningful is the discussion? And there's not much they can change because they can't actually get any material referendums passed. So they
I'm
can't
sure that
actually-
wasn't like a midterm election problem, just apathy due to the fact that they're not electing core. So why are they gonna bother voting? They'll come back in 2 years and worry about it then.
Well, the bylaws change wasn't particularly well articulated, I would say.
No.
And it was a problem with it.
Well, then that goes back to the leadership
Right.
issue. Which
That's
is,
exactly like leadership. That's what was the problem.
so,
Well, so who's viewed
I mean,
as...
and so basically what I'm kind of saying is that should all be sidestepped. There's a nice existing infrastructure which works for some definition of work, for creating a stable tree, but in terms of advancing, for broadening the appeal of FreeBSD and pulling in a younger developer base, other people will have to sort of step up and do that because they have to provide the leadership. We have to provide the leadership.
So who would people view as like inspiring or leadery FreeBSD developers? Like, who would you rally behind in any kind of like work towards a larger scale goal? No, don't point at me. because I have enough people that dislike me at the moment. I don't need to be followed.
Well, I think that's the problem though too, is that
Everybody
that goes back to everything being consensus driven is that when meaningful decisions are made, there's always going to be losers and people hurt, so you just don't ever make the decisions. Or they get picked up by virtue of being a fait accompli.
But there's no decision to be made. We're talking about...
No, we're on a driven tangent, basically. So he's saying, well, won't people step up and lead this charge? And I'm saying, who's going to lead it?
And it's a
And
network.
basically, I'm effectively leading it by trying to propose this to you to get you engaged and interested. And basically, if you can spread the word and basically evolve the concept a little bit to engage people in your tree is the...
So this is how you get people involved in FreeBSD, or you want to talk about getting new people involved and younger people involved. It's a network effect to do with socializing. And
That's why I'm talking to
leadership
here
and
as
demonstration.
opposed to the Dev Summit or at BSD is, because here at least this is people outside of it, and it's still an echo chamber effect, but at least it's outside of the core FreeBSD folks.
I nominate you, Kip. I'll follow you. I worked with you.
Well, for the moment I've nominated myself, but and hopefully, if we can get enough traction with this, then it can sort of, and if it makes sense, that it can sort of go forward of its own accord. Basically, people who think it
Well,
makes
let's
sense.
ask the other developers and see if we can find a handful of people that are willing to
Yeah, but
go through and pull patches out of the Git push thing. We'll just ask Ed to not kill them, but but to like poke people and say, we've got a bunch of pull requests, who wants to review them and see what's worth it, and see what
I
happens.
mean, and I think the thing to do is that basically people who care about this can take some narrow slice of the kernel and say, where do you embed it or networking? What are you mainly working on these days?
PowerPC.
Oh, the free internet
They're
died.
completely outside everything.
Yeah, okay, well, but
Oh, free internet just died.
say if you work on basically take your slice,
goes out
and
at a
basically
certain
on the
hour.
relevant mailing list, say, if you want to get patches in, clone my tree, check them in, and submit pull requests. basically, and then basically I will merge them upstream. Basically, and everyone does that for his little slice of the tree.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
I mean, you do it for PowerPC, you and Nathan mostly do it for PowerPC, I mostly do it for Wi-Fi. I mean, we've got small bits of it going, but there are the tree is very big.
Well, I don't think, we can't allow ourselves to be intimidated by that. Basically, you solve the problem for the portions that you can. We're not going to solve this for VM. I don't know if it's even solvable because VM's so complex, but
I mean,
I think networking, very little has changed in networking in the last 4 years. I can comfortably do it for networking. Alexander Chernikov seems to think he's got substantive changes going on in the next couple months. We'll see.
I've been following his branch out.
He sounds too much like Ake.
Yes, well, but he has,
But it sounds promising. What he's talking about sounds like worthwhile. But in general, there hasn't been a lot of change, and so a lot of the kernel, there's just simple fixes to be made. We basically just not get bogged down on the parts that you can't cover. We cover the parts you can, and the rest of it is sort of. And then maybe you get enough traction with enough people, the people will pick that up. So.
There are 488 branches on GitHub for FreeBSD.
488 forks or branches?
Branches.
So,
Those are all projects.
Those are our branches.
Yeah.
Because they mirror the FreeBSD branches, including the projects and user directories into FreeBSD. You're looking for the number of, and contrib, yeah. You're looking for the number of forks. It's what's much more interesting.
So this would be sort of a distributed lieutenant model, because and ideally, it would basically be without too much more heat than light. Allow some level of hierarchy for this, so that basically some dictates, which shit gets pushed in. But as an interim step, that sounds promising.
Let's keep doing that what we've been doing and expand to look at GitHub and encourage.
But I think the thing to do to make it useful is get the word out that this is a mechanism for doing it.
Put it on the new website.
Yes. Oh. It's okay. You and I control Claudia into doing that. It's fine.
Yeah.
So Claudia's has a lot of friends in the web space, and FreeBSD is viewed as old and crufty, and there's a large amount of.
But my kind of feeling is a sort of a half cowboy though is if the people doing it don't aren't making traction rather than getting bogged down with that, you basically okay, we'll have a new FreeBSD.org website, and that's where people are going to get pointed at. And this is going to be the modern version. And the docs people are either going to assimilate this or they're going to be made irrelevant.
So just as an example about stuff that people could do to make people more excited, doing all those arbitrary little device ports that a lot of the developers think are pointless, but having FreeBSD run on the Chromebook ARM got a bunch of people interested, and Peter's been working on that. The fact we brought up FreeBSD on a Surface Pro, people went out and bought Surface Pro and Surface Pro 2 devices because they saw that this was running, and this got them excited, right? The thing is that there are a bunch of people that work on stuff that gets people excited,
right?
But that's not FreeBSD. That's not traditionally what FreeBSD is viewed. And so when you see when I see Peter showing off the Chromebook the Chromebook ARM stuff, I'm like, this is cool. This is new, and this opens us up to some more stuff. And some people really like the idea of working on this little embedded laptop that's useful. But a lot of the community doesn't find that stuff interesting. I cop enough crap from people who say, why do I bother hacking on FreeBSD?
Well, basically the thing is the people, they don't find it interesting, and so what you have to do is take people who care about the sort of future direction of the community and are willing to sacrifice other areas of their life will pull that crap in to get people engaged. And basically, it's just like, if everyone's collectively too apathetic to do that, then the outcome, is just further stagnation.
Great job, kid. Thank you.